All right, folks, welcome back to the Indispensable Man podcast. I've got a huge treat for you today. Today, we are going out of role for the first time in 2024 as I bring in my co-host and good friend, Jeff Fields, to talk to our incredible guest, Shavonne Thompson, today. As I mentioned in a prior podcast, Out of Role is the new format this year where Jeff is coming on board and helping me with my interviews of individuals who are in law enforcement or are law enforcement retired or law enforcement adjacent. We had such a great response on the show last year as we started to lean in and focus on issues impacting and affecting our first responders in law enforcement that I wanted to bring in someone with even more experience in the field than me to co-host with me and have these incredible conversations with guests like Shavonne. So you can look forward to more episodes like this throughout the year where Jeff and I dig into the issues behind the badge and we look to balance the badge and talk as much as we can about work-life balance, mental health, and finding spaces where first responders can be seen and can get the assistance and help that they need to have happy, healthy lives and careers. So today, our guest for our Out of Role episode is Shavonne Thompson. Shavonne is an incredible person, as you're going to hear in this interview. She's the founder of Throttle and Thrive. Throttle and Thrive is a men's-only 6-bed detox and residential inpatient substance misuse treatment program that is exclusively for veterans and first responders. Throttle and Thrive is a 12-step program. They also place a large emphasis on overcoming and processing trauma through a variety of different modalities, including EMDR. Throttle and Thrive is licensed by the California Department of Healthcare Services. They take insurance. They're in network with a bunch of different providers, and they are a great resource that is out there for law enforcement officers, veterans, and first responders who are struggling with addiction issues. I never thought about it until the conversation we had with Shavonne. But if you are a law enforcement officer or first responder who is struggling with addiction issues, one of the most frightening things that you can be dealing with is a fear of going into a rehab setting, going into an inpatient treatment facility where you are with general population individuals who maybe have criminal histories, maybe are individuals that have been arrested by police, by law enforcement, maybe are court ordered to be in those scenarios and situations. And that is the sort of thing that prevents our heroes from getting the help that they need. Shavonne has stepped up to the plate in a major way by providing the only facility in the nation that we know about that is offering this sort of service specifically and exclusively to our first responders, our veterans, our law enforcement officers. So this is an incredible person. I hope you will give Throttle and Thrive your full support. Follow them on social media, on Instagram. Check them out and check out Shavonne. She is doing some incredible things for our community. But guys, you're going to love this episode. You're going to love where it goes. You're going to love the conversation. You're going to love Jeff's insights that he provides. I can't wait to get some feedback on this one. Check it out, folks, and I will catch you on the other side. Welcome to the Indispensable Man podcast. I'm your host, Kristofor Healey. In my career as a special agent, I traveled the globe taking on some of the world's most notorious criminal organizations. Along the way, I learned valuable lessons in leadership, mindset, and tactics that were the foundation of my professional success. My mission today is to share those lessons with you so that you can approach your life with a tactical advantage and become an indispensable man for your family. Several times per week, I'll share leadership and mindset tips, tools of the trade, and conversations with inspirational guests that can give you the skills you need to win the day and live your life with valor. All right, welcome back to the show. This is kind of a new addition, and it's something that we're going to be doing a ton of in 2024, and I'm super excited because we have had such a great response from guests who are in law enforcement or guests who are affiliated or associated with law enforcement. And, you know, I asked one of our most popular 2023 guests to join me and start doing some episodes where we could combine our expertise. And so let me first introduce my good friend and classmate from the Academy, Jeff Fields. And Jeff, give yourself a quick reintroduction to the group, and then we'll send it over to our honored guest, Shavonne, as well.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so I'm a 22-year law enforcement veteran. I split the two between local law enforcement and the last half of my career in federal law enforcement. My mission, as you will hear, or one of the reasons I'm here is because Shavonne's doing something that I'm passionate about. I'm an advocate for addiction recovery within the law enforcement community or the first responder community, mental health issues. And that's part of my story. And so I'm real passionate about it. So any opportunity I can to help push the message or lean on people like Shavonne is something that I'm super excited about. So I'm glad to be here.
Outstanding. And we're calling these segments that we're going to do with regularity in 2024 our out of role segments on the podcast. And, we'll see what the response is. I mean, this may end up spinning off into its own podcast at some point where out of role really is its own thing, because we've had such a great response from people in the law enforcement community. And as I mentioned, Jeff was on one of our episodes late in the year. He talked a lot about his personal story, about his upcoming book, Sobered from Sin. And we've got such a long standing relationship and such a comfortable back and forth. I thought it would be awesome to have him on board talking to our guests who are law enforcement or law enforcement related, like our guest today. Please introduce yourself. We're so excited to have you here, and I want to hear all about your background, all about your story. Give us the 30,000-yard view. We'll shut up and listen, and then I'm sure it's going to trigger some questions for the old investigators to ask and dig deeper in.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Great to be here with you and Jeff. I'm Shavonne Thompson. I'm a grateful alcoholic, first and foremost. So been in recovery since January 28th of 2013, which is 10 years and 11 months and some days. So I'm very excited to be coming up on 11 years. Thank you. At the end of this month. And that was a really big reason and part of why I started Throttle and Thrive. Throttle and Thrive is a detox and residential treatment program for substance misuse. In other words, we're a rehab. We offer detox and residential care exclusively for first responders and veterans. And gosh, I could go on and on about my story. I probably talked for 45 minutes straight. So let's see, in a nutshell, and then maybe we can dive into different parts of it. I'm a California native, grew up in Ventura. I started drinking when I was 13, started using at 13 as well. But I was really good at living a double life and very high functioning. So I was kind of a good kid on one side and a bad kid on the other, got straight A's all through school, played soccer, did all kinds of really amazing things. But I was out, drinking, partying, using, etc. And then when I went to college, my drinking really picked up because alcohol was a lot harder to get, especially in high school. It was a lot easier to get like marijuana and different things, but alcohol was tough. But then going into college, I went to USC. I studied engineering. I have 2 degrees in engineering, and alcohol was everywhere. I joined a sorority. And about age 21, I realized I do not drink like my friends. I go out just to have some fun, get a buzz, and I end up blacked out, not remembering what happened, not good things happening to me. And so I quit drinking for about a month. And I was like, I am just done after a particularly bad night of drinking. I'm never going to drink again. And then a month later, once I was feeling better, I picked up a drink, and then my alcoholism was worse. And then I continued to drink until it was about 2009. I had graduated from USC with a master's degree in engineering. I was living in Hermosa Beach, which has a big drinking culture, a lot of fun down there. I was hanging out actually with some Navy SEALs that were in like their 30s, and they were going back to school on the GI Bill. And those guys like to drink and party, and they were a lot of fun. And they taught me how to do CrossFit. So we do CrossFit on the beach, and then we go drink, and that was a blast. Also somewhat very dysfunctional, but a lot of fun. And then after a particularly terrible bender in Las Vegas in July of 2009, came back to Hermosa Beach and was like, I cannot drink. This is costing me my friendships, my dignity, lots of other things. And so I quit drinking for about 3 months, and I was just white knuckling it. I was a hermit. All I did is go to the gym and go to work. And I was actually pretty miserable. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what alcoholism really was. I didn't know what recovery was. I certainly had no idea about Alcoholics Anonymous. And then one day my roommate had some friends over for a poker night, and I picked up a beer, and then it was back off to the races of just blackout drinking. And I continued to drink until 2013, when I got sober. And when I got sober for real in January of 2013, that's when I found out what recovery was. And I got into the rooms of AA. And I got a sponsor, and I started working the steps, and I started doing what they told me to do. And that's when I was able to really get into recovery, and not just physical sobriety. I think there's a big difference between not drinking and being physically sober versus being emotionally sober. So through the program of recovery and AA and the steps and the meetings and the women, I was able to develop emotional sobriety and grow and develop on a personal level, which I really, really, really needed. And I was 27 years old at that time. And that's what launched me into being a productive member of society and a person of dignity and respect, and being able to then carry that message to others and help other people. And it's been really amazing to watch my story impact the lives of others.
That
Yeah.
that is incredible. But there's so many different ways I want to take this, obviously. And so you're that's 10 years ago. You've done a lot since then. Obviously, you've got Throttle and Thrive now. So what's the transition point from getting cleaned up, getting sober, to deciding that you wanted to do this, to actually be the person who is the leading light to others and providing resources to others? Was there a gradual transition? I know we talked a little bit offline about your Christian faith. Obviously, I want to hear more about that as well. I think Jeff has a shared story where that's concerned. But tell me a little bit about the last 10 years now.
Yeah. So I got sober and I was working in construction. I worked for a multi-billion-dollar general contractor. We rebuilt the Pentagon after 9/11. I mean, not me personally, I was in 10th grade, but that company. So I was working for a great, amazing company, had this corporate career, had company stock, company truck, company gas card, amazing health insurance, like all the bells and whistles. And then I received this vision, and it was for a treatment center. And backing up a little bit, so when because that vision came, I think I was 35, but when I was about 30 and I found out what treatment was and that healthcare covered people to actually go to treatment, I'm like, I want to start a treatment center. That would be amazing. I love mentorship. I love encouraging people. I'm really good with systems, process, procedure. And like, I could totally run a treatment center. And then I looked at the risk and what it costs. And it costs a ridiculous amount of money to start a treatment center. And the failure risk is very, very, very high. And so after investigating for all of, 30 minutes on Google of what it takes to start a treatment center, I slammed that door shut. And I was like, no way. I'm not willing to risk what I have going in my career and give up my social life. Because starting a business, I knew that it would take all of my time, and 24/7 I would be working, which is true. And I just wasn't willing at that point. I really wanted to get married. I wanted to have time to date. I still want to get married. That still hasn't happened. But at that time, I just shut the door on it. And then fast forward 5 years later in 2021, so I'm 35, almost 36 at the time, I received this vision and this word to start a treatment center. And at first I didn't think that it was real. And then I started investigating. I'm like, wait a minute, maybe I really could do this. I had been saving up to buy a house. And so instead of buying a house, I took that money and rolled it into starting the business and just started liquidating all of my assets to be able to do this. And doors started opening and conversations started happening and people started appearing until it became undeniably clear that this is what I was meant to do. And I feel like everything in my life has set me up to be able to do this. One of the things that happened is I lived in Los Angeles through 2020, through George Floyd, through the pandemic, and watching how the general public treated law enforcement just absolutely appalled me. And so I wanted to have a dog in the fight, and I wanted to stand up for our first responders and law enforcement, and our military, and be a voice that supports them and provide a place where physically they can be safe and emotionally they can be safe. Because I have, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but I have heard just horror stories of, for example, law enforcement going to a general population treatment facility for detox. And as soon as the other people in that facility who have been incarcerated found out that that individual was law enforcement, he felt like they were going to attack him. And so he left and then came to our facility. I've had other clients tell me that they've been in groups with therapists who are not pro law enforcement, and those therapists have just called them out for being law enforcement or belittled them or shamed them publicly. I'm just like, that is absolutely wrong. And I want to have a dog in the fight. And I wanted to be able to stand up for what I believe in and be a place where law enforcement, first responders, and veterans can come and be supported and appreciated, and also have a treatment facility that's really built around their needs. Because it's a different type of trauma. It's a different type of experience. And so really I'm running a trauma clinic that also focuses heavily on addiction and substance abuse. And that is not always typical of all treatment centers. Some of them are just about recovery or just about getting sober. But ours is really that blend of a trauma center and dealing with the mental health aspects, and then also the vocational trauma. That's not something that's normal for most people. Most people trauma, they're a victim, but first responders, they're the ones that actually have signed up, and veterans have signed up to go and actually be in a job where they're going to see a lot of trauma and critical incidents. So
That is
Wow.
such an incredible story. Obviously, uh, just incredibly selfless decision, and I can see how a background in engineering could influence and allow you to have a project management sort of skill set that would be very transferable to what you're doing now. So I can see how you didn't end up here accidentally. It probably feels that way a lot of the time, that the path was not exactly A to Z. A couple of questions I had, and then I'm sure Jeff's got a ton. Um, First of all, do you have anyone who's in your family, in your immediate family, who is in law enforcement? Or is it just, I mean, because obviously 2020 impacted all of us who were in law enforcement. I wasn't in uniform at the time. I was in a plainclothes position, but man, I saw dozens of guys that I knew who were uniform in the city of Houston retire. I saw a lot of guys that I worked with in Illinois retire. People underestimate the impact that had on law enforcement in general, and the brain drain, just the loss of people. So I empathize with you seeing that as well firsthand. But do you have anyone in your family who is law enforcement?
no, actually, I don't. I
That's
don't. I
that's
just
even more incredible. Jeff, I know you've got questions.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's awesome. And one of the things I hear, well, first off, all alcoholics have the same story. They really do. And if you go and so in AA, they call it the rooms. So that's where you go and you sit in a circle like they show on TV, right? Um, so inside of the rooms, it's funny because everybody tells their story and you hear your story and their story. So Shavonne
Mhm.
sharing right now, I hear a little bit of my story, right? That's the incredible thing about it, because we're not unique by any means. But it's a testament to listening to something bigger than you, like it sounds like you did, right?
Mhm.
And in recovery, one of the things that we do is we don't listen, or excuse me, in addiction, we don't listen to what we're supposed to be listening to. And when you start listening is when the path opens up. And it sounds like, Shavonne, whenever you finally gave in and listened to, hey, God's like, hey, I want you to do a recovery center, the door started opening. You said the key word there, right? And I think that's amazing. Um, how much of how much of AA played a part in this, or are you more of a? Because I know a lot of people don't like AA, right? So some people will say, I will do a recovery 12-step program, but I don't like AA, because there are different programs out there. So I don't know, is your facility geared towards that, or are you more towards, and actually I should rephrase it, because I know a lot of Christians that don't like AA because higher power is kind of a bad word to them. You know, it's God. It's God. Say God, right? Um, and I know out in California, I think it's what is it? Saddle Ranch Church came up with a recovery,
Celebrate. Celebrate
celebrate
recovery.
recovery. Yeah. So I mean, how are you using a lot of those different models?
Sure. So we're a 12-step based program through Alcoholics Anonymous. And that is our primary method for combating alcoholism. Most of our clients come in with alcoholism. Some of them have other, drug of choice that they like, but primarily it's alcohol. So we are based in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. We
Mm,
take our clients to actual AA meetings every day. We help guide them through the steps, or at least the beginning of that. We talk about the importance of getting a sponsor, continual sobriety, fit daily spiritual condition, that it's a lifelong recovery process. It's not like you're magically fixed after you come to rehab. Um, and I personally just don't see the other programs like Smart Recovery. I don't see them as being as effective. And I don't see
mm,
them as being there's not as much bang for your buck. Like, I know that AA works. It's worked
mm,
for me. Most of my staff is in recovery. I see it working for our clients, and I've seen it for over a decade now working across the entire planet. And so I know AA works. That's what we teach, and that's what we preach here. We don't really implement any of the other models, so to speak, some clients do come in with a resistance to AA for whatever reason. They don't want to identify as an alcoholic, or, sometimes coppers don't want to go to a meeting with general pot, but we try to, through exposure therapy, like, hey, it's okay. You can like this meeting, or there's such a wide variety of meetings. You really only need to find 1, 2, or 3 per week that you really like and feel comfortable at. You don't have to feel comfortable at every AA meeting. So we introduce them. We do really promote AA and the 12 steps. Sometimes people do have an issue with either God or higher power. I love the approach that AA takes with higher power, because some people have been really traumatized by religion or their upbringing or whatever their experience is, or they're just staunchly agnostic or atheist. And it gives them a good place to start where they can start to wrap their head around it. And then most of our clients that come here, they start to see God working in their life. And we tell them from the beginning, like, you're going to start to see things here and start to question, like, could it really just be coincidence? And by the 10th time things are happening, they're like, okay, maybe it's not coincidence. We say, well, is it odd or is it God? And so they start to see, and they start to awaken. And then the other thing is, we're not a faith-based program. And I specifically set us up as a secular program because I don't want the people who need our help to not come in, because we've had several clients come in atheist, agnostic, or hating God for whatever reason. And I want to reach those people. Actually, that's where my heart is, to reach them specifically. And once they come in and they start to see that there's something greater going on here, and then the staff talks about, their experience with higher power through AA, they start to open up. And a lot of people, they come in here so broken and so desperate that they are willing to try almost anything, because they've recognized that what they were doing didn't work. And so as a believer, I will invite them to church with me. And so they can either, like on Wednesday night, they can go to an AA meeting with the staff, or they can come to church with me. And it's completely optional. And some of the people will be like, all right, I'm going to try it. I'm going to just give it a try. And like last night, we had a cop come, and he was not raised Christian, was not raised with faith. And I was like, okay, we'll see how this goes for this guy. And at the end, I'm like, okay, so what'd you think? And he's like, I really liked it. I actually really liked it a lot. I think this is like what I need. I'm like, okay, great. That's amazing. And we have seen the most transformation and the most progress happen with the clients that are willing to have a spiritual experience and willing to explore. And I always tell them, like, faith is not blind, and question everything. Question, investigate, educate yourself, and go on a journey of figuring out what the truth is. And that's really important. So
No, absolutely. And I didn't mean to play devil's advocate against AA there. But it is something that I experienced. Well, I grew up Catholic, which I'm a recovering Catholic now. I'm a Christian, through and through. I have a relationship with Jesus now. But anyway, I know, to your point, so I've been to 2 rehabs, and we can touch base on that, because you said some things opening up as far as feeling safe, right, at rehabs. And I agree with you. I see so many people that came in that were so against faith, religion, or anything. Religion's a bad word in my world.
Same.
Yeah. But within months, even weeks, you would see that turn, that spark, and they're like, oh my gosh, the big book, which is the AA book, Chris, they call it the big book. There's even a chapter for the agnostic, right? So it's for the people that don't know or don't have any type of foundational faith. And so, but in the end, and even in, I've been to Narcotics Anonymous meetings where, it's primarily people that deal with a drug addiction. It's the same thing there, right? Everybody starts to turn that corner a little bit, and oh my goodness, there's something else there that that's bigger than me, and I can't make these decisions on my own. And it's beautiful. That's what I love. And I'm real passionate about you bringing in the faith. I know you're not a faith-based organization, and I totally know why, because yes, it is very scary. You have to just get them in the door first, right? And go from there. I mean, to put it bluntly. But yeah, so I think that in the end, just letting somebody know that they have a safe place to go, like you said, can open up so many other doors. So what has been, is that been your only challenge with law enforcement, just knowing the safe space, or is it something else? Or
There's lots of challenges. One is the officers admitting that they need help. That's
Yeah.
probably the biggest thing. And
Yeah,
then,
the ego death, right? I mean, that's got to be that's the first thing that went through my head. I'm glad you asked that question, Jeff.
yeah, that's big. Them admitting and then knowing where to go. A lot of times people or officers, they don't understand that their healthcare covers treatment and that they can go. So knowing what the options are and knowing that there's places for them that see them, that support them, that are specifically designed for them. So that's one of the barriers. Of course, insurance policies and cost and billing, that can be like with HMO plans that don't have any out of network benefits, that presents challenges. And then sometimes different departments, there's a very wide spectrum with the departments. Of some departments are so supportive and will jump through hoops to make sure that their Leos can get to treatment and are taken care of and don't have to worry about work. And then other departments that are not as supportive. So that unfortunately is a barrier.
That's can I dig in on that a little bit? I'm curious because Jeff, your experience with rehab was when you were employed by law enforcement agencies. Is that right?
twice? Yeah.
So in both cases, did the agency know what was the agency's? Because I know that's a big issue that you and I dealt with in our federal careers was, and we've talked about this about the lack of EAP, the lack of resources, and we can get into what our agency they didn't pay the bills on EAP, so we didn't even have that option. But the idea that if I show weakness, one, I could lose my status with the people that I work with who rely on me, right? They think that guy's untrustworthy. They don't want to go through a door with you. Number two, is it going to damage or harm my relationship with my agency? Am I going to be put into, there's things they cannot do. They can't retaliate, but there's plenty of things that you can do that aren't retaliation that put somebody in a box. And so I'm curious from your experience, Jeff, and then maybe Shavonne, maybe you could touch on this from the side of a provider. That's got to be a major sticking point, right? Is that like reluctance to get help because it's an admission that you're not the the Iron Man, you're not the infallible individual that you have to be when you put on that uniform or you wear that badge, and that fear that comes with that and what that could mean to your career. So Jeff, maybe if you could talk a little bit about that, and Shavonne, your opinion as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down, and you and I have talked about this before. Is there's a lack of education within departments. My experience was not on the local side, and I know going to rehab, and I know a lot of local departments are far more advanced in the mental health than the federal government is. And I think the federal government has its own unique challenges because you have individuals that are starting to worry about, hey, I'm going to lose my security clearance. That's one of the questions that I have to answer every 5 years, right? Do I want to do that? So I know a lot of guys struggle with that. I struggled with that. But after a while, I started thinking to myself, I don't care anymore, right? I want to get sober. I want my family back. I want my health back. But going back to your question as far as support with the agencies, I think that with the first agency I was with Homeland Security, within a specific department in Homeland, I did have support. I did have managers coming to visit me at rehab. My second agency, which is, I would just leave it unnamed. Well, you'll figure it out. I had to go through a slew of medical evaluations after rehab in order to get clearance to go back on the job. So with that said, I felt like I did something wrong. Like, why did I go to rehab? Oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to go back to work. They don't want me carrying a gun and they can't trust me now because I got help. So how are you navigating that? Or do you see those issues? I'm sure you do, but.
we do, yes. Some of them is just the fear that a lot of like deputies and officers come in of like, oh no, I'm not going to have my job, or they're going to fire me, or they're like, if I don't get out of here early and get back to work, I'm like letting my team down. So there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of pressure. Usually it's all based in things that really aren't reality and aren't true. In general, what I've seen out here is most agencies are actually really supportive. They want the deputy, the officer, to stay the full 30 days or complete the entire program. And in general, if let's say like the deputy has self-identified and come here voluntarily, typically there's not a fit for duty for them to return. However, with deputies, law enforcement that got in trouble at work and were kind of mandated to go to treatment, a lot of times there is a fit for duty. But with our guys that have gone through that, they've been okay. They've had to go through the paperwork. They've had to wait. It's had to be scheduled. They've had to have the psych evals, and we've had to send in their medical records and things like that. But they are back on patrol, and they're doing great. So it's part of the process, and it's kind of the sucky part. But in some cases, it's there for good reason. But I would say for most people, trust the process, and it's okay, and you're going to be all right. Your job is going to be there. And honestly, most agencies are so understaffed. They can't afford to get rid of someone, and they don't want to. And they don't want even that like stain on their record of, oh, we terminated so-and-so because they had a mental health issue, because usually, I mean, addiction is a mental health issue. And so they don't want to get rid of someone. They want you to get well. And that's what we try to emphasize to our clients is focus on yourself. Take hold of everything that we have to offer you. Take it seriously, really invest, put yourself out there in developing yourself, not just physically getting sober, but emotionally getting sober. Set up your plan, set up your aftercare, because it's not a magical wand, bippity boppity boo, 30 days in treatment and you're fixed. We're a launch pad. We're a reset and a recalibration that will then set you up for success if someone continues to work a program of recovery, follow through with their aftercare plan, and do all of the things that work. And in that case, they're going to excel in their career. And when they are back to the agency, their agency is going to see, hey, there is something different about you. You are showing up to work on time, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, because most of these guys were showing up to work like hungover. So of course they're or if they even showed up at all. I mean, they're calling out sick. They're in bad shape when they come here. And so to then be sober and show up to work at a full capacity, the department's gonna be like, wow, you're a tremendous asset. And one of the things I've done is I've networked with a lot of local coppers, and they come over as volunteers, and they're in recovery and they're sober. So they come over and they talk about what it was like for them drinking on the job, getting a DUI while being a cop, getting arrested and going to jail as a cop. And they come in and they share their testimony, and then they get to sit there and say, hey, now I'm 10 years sober and I'm a lieutenant and blah, blah, blah. Look at how like life is good. So it's that peer support, shared experience that also really solidifies like, hey, you can do this. It's going to be okay. You don't have to worry. Just do what you need to do to take care of yourself, to get well, to maintain your sobriety and your mental health.
That is outstanding. And I wish I would have known about your program when I was going through rehab, because I'm 2 years sober and your program was there, right? So because I did struggle.
We're new. We launched in 2023.
Oh, well,
but
then this is
I wish
perfect.
you could have come back.
I know. Well, and that was just the problem, searching. My wife's in federal law enforcement. And so she understands a lot of the struggle and a lot of the stigma that revolves around a lot of it. And so her and I went on a mission on trying to find the right place to go. And this will help me segue into what you were talking about, safe space, because it really is true. I'm an introvert, but I say too much, if that makes sense, in order to get people to like me, right? So this is the whole mental health side, right? So it's just a whole box of worms that we can open up, but I'm not going to. So with that said, when I went to rehab, I let everybody know I'm a cop. Okay. And I did that trying to break the ice. And then also a little bit, I was kind of like, well, I want to show we're fallible too, right? Mm-hmm. And you're right. The reception was not good. The reception was good on some end of it. This was my first rehab. The second rehab, it was a little bit more challenging. But at that point, I didn't care as much about my safety as much as recovery, because it seemed like I was going to be okay. But I can see how an officer or a special agent would feel that, especially kind of like, I think in law enforcement, and Chris could probably attest to this, and I want to break this stigma, but a lot of times law enforcement, we're already held to a higher standard, but we think that we're at a higher standard when we're not, right? Yeah. We're all the same. It's just a job. It's the same job as anybody else. So when you go into a rehab facility thinking that you're better than already, you're going to struggle,
Mm.
especially with taking in a lot of the material that you're getting or listening to other people's stories. So as far as safety, I mean, how often is that you're having, I shouldn't say convince, before somebody reaches out to you, or maybe somebody is on the fence about coming? I mean, what are the tactics that you guys are using in order to sell, like, hey, this is the place for you?
Well, I don't think they have a safety concern with our facility
Yeah.
because we're so small. We only have 6 beds and it's all law enforcement, vets, and first responders. So that's typically not an issue. Honestly, like we talked about earlier, the biggest hurdle is our guys admitting that they need help, especially with law enforcement. So by the time they get to that place where they're admitting they need help, they're in such severe crisis that they're basically begging me to take them. So it's not really much of a sales pitch. It's just, hey, I want to help you. You want to come here? Great. It's a voluntary program. We have to have a financial conversation, but usually, insurance, like out here, we've seen a lot of guys locally. And so I'm in network with the main EAP for them. So that makes it really easy. They don't even have a deductible. It's like, okay, when do you want to come? Great. When people do come from out of state, as long as they have a PPO with out of network benefits, it's like, great. How fast can you get on an airplane and come out here? So it hasn't really been much of a sales pitch. Usually when people look at our website, they see what we're doing, they see our facility, they see, because I wrote every single word on that website. And so they see the messaging and they see that it's patriotic and conservative and geared towards empowering masculinity, and that we're not some woo-woo foo-foo treatment center that's just trying to pretend like we take law enforcement. Because unfortunately, what I've been realizing is there's a lot of larger treatment facilities that are built for general population. And then in their marketing, they say, oh, we have a first responder program. And I talk to their business development people. I'm like, so tell me about your program. They're like, oh, well, if we have more than 2 first responders at any one time, we put them in group together. I'm like, so what about like gym time? What about trauma treatment? What about eating? They're like, oh, all that's with everybody else. And I'm like, that's
Mm-hmm.
not a first responder program. It's not. You're pretending. So I'll probably get in trouble for saying that at some point, but I don't usually have much of a filter. And that's the main difference between our program and other programs is we are not part of a larger treatment facility. We don't deal with general pop, period. And everybody that comes here is in kind of like our little cocoon of things. And we are truly built for first responders and veterans because we don't deal with general pop.
Yeah.
So
When you talk about trauma, and this is something that so my wife is in a 3-year program to become a somatic experiencing practitioner, and so she's big on nervous system regulation and all of that stuff. Uh, and we can talk about trauma from a lot of different things. Like trauma could be you're 5 years old and your parents get in an argument and say something rash that stays with you 20 or 30 years later, and you don't realize it's that small t trauma that kind of informs and influences your decisions. Your dad loses his job when you're a kid, and it causes that financial fear and that scarcity mindset that carries over into how you do things later on in life. So trauma can reveal itself in a lot of different ways. Obviously, when we think about trauma from a law enforcement or military perspective, we're thinking about the day in, day out sort of trauma of experience, the trauma of seeing things that humans do to one another, seeing the abuse of children. Jeff and I both worked on the border. I was in South Texas. He was in Arizona. He grew up in El Paso. His dad was on the border for an entire career. And so, we saw things that I can't describe, just, bodies, picked over by, animals because they were abandoned by smugglers in the brush, or, dead kids getting pulled out of the river because they drowned, people getting pulled out of the back of a tractor trailer in a smuggling event after dying from heat exposure. And, I was the responding agent in San Antonio when that 53-person smuggling load happened. So that sort of stuff like sticks with you from a very real place. You see some of the most awful things. Is that mostly what you're dealing with when you're dealing with people's trauma, or are you dealing with things that precede even their law enforcement? Is a combination thereof? Because I think all of these things, trauma, like I look at it like a backpack. We're constantly putting stones in the backpack, and sometimes we're putting a big old brick in there, or a boulder in there. Other times it's just pebbles. But throughout our life, our story is including adversity, it's including trauma, but then we accelerate that when we get into a law enforcement career. So maybe it's a combination of both. But I'm curious what some of the struggles for the people who are listening, who may be experiencing some of these struggles and are listening to this and saying, am I a candidate for this? Maybe they're asking themselves questions for the first time. What are some of the stories that you're seeing, to the extent that you can tell it, from the people who are coming in and availing themselves of your service?
Sure. So I think most of the general population thinks, oh, yeah, the vocational trauma, first responders, veterans, they've seen all of these terrible things, which is very, very true. Usually that's not the reason that people come in. There's kind of a trifecta. So what I've seen is that the first responders that are able to handle the vocational trauma and the trauma load, typically they're the ones that did not suffer a lot in their childhood or have childhood trauma. It's the first responders that had childhood trauma, went into the profession because they wanted to be the hero, be the person that shows up because they wish that someone had shown up for them when they were a kid. And that might be conscious or unconscious. And then they also are an alcoholic. I believe that alcoholism is not like a learned thing. It's not an environmental thing. It's an affliction. Like, I believe I was born an alcoholic. I know not everyone believes that. That's okay. But in general, it's when those three things all hit together. So someone comes in with childhood trauma. They're also just by nature an alcoholic. And then they have the vocational trauma on top of that. And usually it's when the vocational trauma hits on the childhood trauma. So like if they were, had a violent person in their life as a child, and then they show up to those pediatric cases where that same thing that happened to them, they're seeing that happen to other kids and they weren't able to stop it. It's just too much. And that's where the drinking comes in to like numb that pain or to escape. And then they can't stop drinking, even though they want to stop drinking. And then the drinking causes so many other problems. And it usually causes divorce and broken relationship with their children. And then these guys are just so hurting, so broken, so at the end of the line because they've let their kids down and their wife has left them. And they are just, oh, it's so sad. Like, we had a deputy come in, very intoxicated, and he doesn't remember this, but we were with him for 2 hours, my staff and I, just consoling him as he just basically sobbed uncontrollably about how hopeless he was. And it was because he wasn't able to see his kids. And, he was estranged from his wife and he was just so heartbroken over it. But we were able to help him. It was like his multiple times in treatment, but he hadn't really truly been exposed to AA and the 12 steps in those other programs. And so we were able to break that down for him. And he got a hold of AA and he started doing all of the healthy things and started working with the therapist and continuing with his aftercare. And he's doing really amazing. And that's what we've seen with most of our clients. But going back to the trauma. So it manifests in different ways for different people, but usually what we see is that trifecta, all three of those, and then just too many of those critical incidents, or the divorce, or something else happening in their life, or an injury if they get injured on the job, and then they're at home, especially if they're on painkillers or they're out on medical leave and they can't leave their house and they're basically housebound all day, and then they go nuts. Literally their mental health just declines. We had a deputy come in that was on medical leave for very legit being injured on the job. And he came in and he had been drinking and self-medicating with marijuana. So he was higher drunk all day, every day for like 6 months. And he came in and he told us he had an active plan to eat his gun. And we were able to help him. I mean, he handed me his suicide journal. Like, in treatment, he's like, here, I need you to read this because these are the entries that I'm writing to my daughters for when I'm gone. I'm like, whoa. And then very shortly after that, he's in my office just crying. He's like, I don't want to die anymore. I want to live, because we were able to get him physically sober, start to chip away emotionally, get him into really good therapy sessions, start implementing EMDR, and set him up with a really great plan. And he was one of the guys that came in hating God, had terrible experiences with religion growing up, spent the past 13 years running away from God. But as he started to explore and as things started to happen, he's like, okay, this can't be coincidence. Okay, tell me more about this. He started asking questions. And that's when I was able to sit down with him. And I'm like, okay, let's read Ephesians 6. And he's like, what's that? I'm like, well, the armor of God. I'm like, would you ever show up to work without your gun, without your vest, without your boots, or without your pants? He's like, no, of course not. I'm like, well, why do you show up in this battle of anxiety and depression naked. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, you have to arm yourself on an emotional and a spiritual level. And so I walked him through that, and like light bulbs start coming on. And then he was one of the ones that wanted to come to church. And that was a game changer for him. And he got to experience God. And I mean, I talked to him the other day, and he sends me pictures of his beautiful 2 little girls, and like they got to have their daddy back, and he's doing really well. And he followed through with everything else that we told him to do. And part of that was brain treatment. So with trauma, it's multifaceted, it's deep. Somatic healing is amazing. I'm learning more about that. And so with him, once he was physically sober, emotionally sober, then he was able to get brain treatment. I believe he was doing neurofeedback, and that was a game changer for him because he did have traumatic brain injury. So as he was able to get his brain healed, a lot of his former inability to handle stress and that like emotional overload, that sense of overwhelm that comes typically with brain injury, as his brain healed, he was able to handle more and more and more and get better and better and better. And that's always our goal, is to restore our clients holistically on every level, emotionally, spiritually, physically, biologically, so that they're operating on all levels. And that's another thing that I get a lot of heat about, but we don't use pharmaceuticals as a first line of defense. We try to use them as a very last resort. And I'm really passionate about that. This is very controversial. I know people are going to hate on me for this, but SSRIs, so serotonin reuptake inhibitors, antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, they have a lot of side effects. They can work for some people, but they can also kind of backfire, and they can be used in the short term effectively, and that can be a good thing. But to use them for decades actually will cause a lot of problems. And I had a retired law enforcement guy come in. He had been through a traumatic event, and they put him on a Klonopin and an antidepressant, and then he just stayed on them for 10 years. And he came in at age 65, memory issues, coordination issues. We got him off of both of those drugs. Guess what happened? His memory started coming back. He was sharper. Granted, he also wasn't drinking, but he was sharper. His coordination started coming back, and he felt amazing because he really didn't need to be on those. It's just so often what we see is medical doctors will put people on drugs with no plan to ever get them off, and the damage to their kidney and their liver and everything else. And so we have a wellness director on staff, and she is a nutritionist and a health coach. And so she can, if the clients are open to it, provide holistic solutions to medical issues and help support our clients on a biological standpoint without pharmaceuticals. And if that doesn't work for them, then they can turn to pharmaceuticals. But what we want to do is figure out where their baseline is, right? Because they've been drinking or using for years and years or whatever it is, and they've got all this emotional stuff. So as we bring down their trauma load and as we bring up their emotional sobriety and we kind of level everything out, it's like, well, let's see where you're at, and then let's boost you with vitamins, minerals. Are you deficient in like vitamin D, B12, the basics, all of those things? And once we optimize them fully, we find that most guys, they actually aren't depressed. And we get them exercising, and the natural high and the natural endorphins that these guys get from exercising, they start to feel really, really, really good. And they start to sleep. And sleep is fundamental. And that's a big thing that I push here is sleep. We actually have a PhD behavioral sleep therapist on our team that coaches our guys and helps them to sleep without pharmaceutical drugs. And that's huge because as humans, we have to be able to sleep to function. And I know that I'm a grumpy monkey when I do not get my sleep. And so I don't want them using stimulants or caffeine to the point where they're taxing their system, their adrenal glands. I want them to be able to sleep and operate from that natural standpoint of like, okay, I have energy. I feel good. I can tackle this thing, or I can face this trauma in my therapy session, or whatever it is, or I have the energy to actually be able to work out, because we like to stack our wins. And the more that we can get them sleeping well, eating right, taking their vitamins, working out, and then having, the ability and the capacity to face the other things that are very real, difficult things, whether it's going, back to work and having, again, to see that vocational trauma, or dealing with that broken relationship with their wife or ex-wife, or healing the relationship with their children, they're in a better place to have that capacity to be able to face all of those things. And that's what I love seeing, because that's what we see with our clients, and it's really incredible.
I am like you hit like you checked so many of my boxes in that last couple of minutes. I mean, first of all, like my wife, she's been in the health and wellness space for 15 years, and so somatic healing and talking about nervous system regulation is a huge thing. Sleep is such a massive thing. We don't talk enough about that. Uh, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who Jeff I'm sure knows, he wrote On Killing, On Combat. He's well known in the law enforcement community. I actually had the opportunity to speak at an event with him a few months ago and got to spend the whole day with him. It was incredible. He talked a lot at that event about the importance of sleep and how sleep leads to more suicides in the law enforcement community or lack thereof than almost anything else. There's been studies about this, and it's the lack of sleep. It's the guys working mids forever and never really getting a full night's sleep. And something as simple as a $5 sleep mask that you can buy on Amazon can save people's lives. Earplugs. I'm after that time that I that day I spent with him and I watched him and he was talking about that and sharing that. I went out and bought sleep masks. I bought mouth tape. I did the nose bridges, the whole thing. I was like, I need to improve my sleep quality to improve every other aspect of my life. And something I know as someone who's been in personal training and has been in fitness for a long time, I inherently know those things, but we tend to be like, I'll sleep tomorrow. I'll make up this weekend. And we don't realize the downstream impact on our health and wellness. Another thing you said, and again about SSRIs and everything else, we have a tendency, and I've had a lot of guys on the show with medical backgrounds who have talked about this. Western medicine, and you can get into the background on all this stuff if you want to dig deep in it. But Western medicine, it's a pill for every ill. We have a tendency to treat the symptoms, not the problem. And what I hear about when I hear about, and y'all would know better than me, you can correct me if I'm wrong, when I hear about treatment, what I'm hearing about is a holistic approach to treating the problem that is causing the symptoms to manifest, right? That's causing the addictive behavior to manifest. And a lot of that is, again, it's trauma-based. It's based on some sort of hole that you need to fill inside yourself that a pill is going to mask the impact. But alcohol's a depressant. You remove alcohol from someone's system in the first place. You remove depressants from someone's system in the first place. The antidepressant may not even be necessary. So what are we doing here? We're treating somebody who's got a chemically created depression. We remove the chemical, but we're keeping this other chemical on board. I mean, like there's you would have a conversation with my wife about this that would go on for 2 hours because she's really into informed consent. And there are so many of her clients who come to her in the health and wellness space who come to her after 30 years of birth control and wonder why their hormones are all jacked up or screwed up or whatever, and why their gut health is a mess. And nobody ever told them 30 years ago when they went into the doctor because they had bad acne and got put on birth control that, oh, by the way, these are the prolonged effects of being on this for an extended period of time. Same thing with SSRIs, with other things. I'm certainly not a medical professional, but whenever I hear someone talking about treating the problem, not the symptoms, my ears perk up because that's really not the system we have in the West. And I think there's probably a lot of cops who go in and get a pill for that ill and they mask the symptoms, but they're never really recovering from the problem that's deep inside. And Jeff, I don't know, we've talked about this, right, Jeff?
Yeah, no one will educate them on the side effects. So.
Right.
Yeah, and you hit a couple things that perked my ears up. So you talk about as far as antidepressants may not, they're not the answer by any means because you're putting a Band-Aid over something that exists already that needs to be treated. When I first started really realizing I had a huge issue. I had a DUI. The psychiatrist that reviewed my file and looking at me, and I was explaining to him, and we came to the same conclusion. Me being on the specific antidepressant that I was on was making me more apathetic to my behavior. And so, and I think a lot of people don't look at, and again, it's the Band-Aid, right?
The zombie effect. And I'm like, we will not make zombies out of people.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact that, my daughter or the status of my home life wasn't big enough to make any difference, in my behavior. And then also baselines. You mentioned baselines. And I had a therapist once tell me that, hey, I am not going to treat a lot of because my trauma precedes my career. And you are exactly right. You hit the nail on the head. I was able to handle trauma within my career. That's easy, right? I mean, it's just, I've already learned how to compartmentalize my life. So with that said, it's really hard to treat somebody that doesn't have a good baseline, meaning if you are in active addiction, you need to get to a point where you're off of whatever your substance is in order to really evaluate what is going on in your life.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And even what we see when people come down off alcohol, because usually they've been drinking heavily, consistently for years and years. So their blood pressure initially like goes up, but then it comes down. And so as their body is readjusting and recalibrating, we don't want to throw a bunch of extra meds in there. It's like, let's get you just cleaned up, detoxed, and let's figure out where you're really at naturally. And then, yeah, help with the supplements and the diet and the exercise and everything else. And then if there's still a problem, there might be, then let's look at other things.
Yeah, and would you agree though that also has to deal with mental health as well, because you really don't know where you're going as long as you're numb.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is if we just put people on antidepressants and anti-anxiety, then they're less motivated to deal with the real problem. So I like to say, your check engine oil light comes on your car. Do you just take the little light bulb out? No,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you go change the oil. And so if, like I just explained to our clients, if you're having anxiety, it's your body telling you there's a problem and you need to deal with it. And if you just continue to tell that problem or that indicator to be quiet, you're not dealing with the problem and it's going to come out sideways. It's going to come out in some way, shape, or form, either in cancer or an illness or a breakdown or complete apathy or whatever it is. It's going to come out. The body
Mm-hmm.
will not shut up. And so we
Mm-hmm.
have to deal with it at the root level. And it looks different for different people. It could be the brain injury. It could be talk therapy. It could be EMDR. It could be repairing those relationships. It can be all of the different things, but it's identifying, okay, what is the root issue and how do we deal with that? Because our body will tell us what's wrong and we need to not silence the indicator.
How many of your clients or patients, I should say, I'm sorry.
Clients, we call them clients.
Oh, okay, good.
Mhm.
Come in that have childhood trauma.
All of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I and I'm a big believer in it. I'm not a medical professional, right, or a mental health professional. I have the experience. So in my circles and in my life, I saw that a lot of people that are lean towards the military, to first responders, to law enforcement, have some sort of trauma in their past. Not all of them have some sort of trauma in their past because they want to be problem solvers and fix the problem. Would you?
Yep. Oh, absolutely. That's usually what we see and why they went into the profession. Yep.
Yeah. And they're good at it. And like yourself, I meant to mention earlier, you are a very driven individual. You're very successful. And I think a lot of alcoholics are, right?
Yeah.
We want to do things at 100% and I'm going to do it well. And if I fail, well, we won't talk about failure, right?
We don't do that.
Yeah. And I think you see that in the law enforcement profession and the military is, you want to do something well. You're a problem solver. You show up to the scene. You fix the problem. You go to the next call. Then you go home. You have a problem. I don't know how to handle this problem because I have to live with it.
Mm-hmm.
Are a lot of these individuals sharing that with you?
Yeah, it's a different skill set, right? What
Mm-hmm.
you do at work vocationally is very, very different than at home dealing with, a wife, small children, etc. It's such a different skill set. It's more actually emotionally taxing because you actually like love and care for those people and have made that commitment. Where at work, I mean, I do genuinely believe that all first responders really care about the general public and the people that they're administering care to, but they don't know them personally. They didn't say wedding vows to that person. So they typically tend to be so much more connected to their family, rightfully so, as all of us are. And that is typically the heavier trauma load, especially with the divorce or the children. Yeah.
And you can't fix that problem, right? I mean, or it
Well,
doesn't go away.
we
Or it can
teach,
be fixed, I'm saying, but it just, it doesn't happen immediately like we're used to, you know?
It requires a lot more discipline and hard work and knowledge and tools. And so
Yeah.
often they just don't have the training or the knowledge or the tools or those soft skills to be able to deal with conflict, to be able
Yeah.
to have those right emotional, intimate relationships like with their wife, with their girlfriend, with their children. They're not taught that. And so that's something that we help them work through and teach them. And we will do couples therapy, couples counseling here. They can come in for that. If the wife is local, she can drive here and come on in, or if she's far away, we can Zoom her in. So that is something that we do here.
And one more quick question, Chris, and I'll pass it back to you. I know withdrawal was a huge issue for me, detoxing. It wasn't as bad going into rehab because I frequently try to detox myself at home. And I learned at rehab, it is the most deadly out of all of them, alcohol, typically to detox. It'll kill you in a minute. I'm waiting for the seizure to come on. How does your facility handle that? Or what education are you giving your guys and women?
Yeah. So typically for alcohol detox, we do put them on Valium for safety reasons, but it's not, we're putting you on Valium for the next decade. It's the next 1 to 5 days at most, typically 2 to 3 days. And honestly, once someone's kind of out of that danger zone and they're feeling better, most of our clients start declining the Valium. They're like, I don't even want this. But you're right, with very severe alcoholism, there is a risk of seizures, stroke, heart attack, etc., or other medical complications. And so we do advise them, and our doctor meets with them and is the one to make the call and make the assessment and write the prescription. But typically, we do use Valium, and we always have high blood pressure medication on hand, and we monitor their vitals every hour or 2 hours, especially on their first day or two, and we check on them every 20 minutes. And so we're constantly checking on them, assessing them, monitoring vitals, and seeing medically where they're at. And we do have other meds that we can give them during detox. And we're not trying to torture anyone during detox. So we like to make them, comfortable and of course medically be safe. But most of our clients don't really want a lot of the meds. They refuse a lot of the comfort meds during detox, and that's their right. So we respect their medical autonomy and just educate them on, hey, there's a risk for seizures. So, depending on where they come in, some guys detox at home and then they come in. And then we admit them for residential. So it depends. But yes, there is a medical risk there, and we're very aware of that.
I wanted to come at this, and do you have time for one more question, Shavonne? I know we're a little bit
you're
over
good.
here.
Yeah.
Okay. I, as someone where I felt when Jeff told me that he had gone to rehab a couple of times, I didn't know that. And granted, we don't live in the same space. We don't see each other every day. We text and talk and have had a ongoing relationship for 15 plus years now, or thereabouts, I think. But I felt a certain amount of guilt about not recognizing or knowing that the struggle was happening. And I know that probably for people who are in law enforcement profession, they see their friends every day, they go to work every day, they're going to recognize and know something in the back of their head is going to say there's some sort of problem here, but I don't know how to approach this. And I never felt or saw that, but I've seen it with others that I've thought to myself, this guy's struggling, and how do I approach that? And do either of you, I'll open this up to both of you, do either of you have any sort of advice, having been addicts yourselves, and having struggled with that, what advice do you have to people who are kind of the outside looking in on how to approach that, how to suggest that maybe you need help? And especially, Jeff, for you coming from a law enforcement profession, did anyone come to you? Did people, for both of you, I suppose, anyone come to you? Were there people who were in your corner who were saying, "Hey, listen, I care about you and I want you to get some help"? And if so, would it have mattered? Maybe if they didn't, would it have mattered if they did? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that from someone from the outside looking in, because this is, it can be a tender and obviously a very personal issue, and you don't want to overstep. And I think that's where a lot of us, might have concerns, but you might save a life as well. So give me your thoughts on that, if y'all would.
Yeah. Until people are ready and they want the help, there's not that much that we can do. I mean, we can point it out, we can nag at them, we can make suggestions, give them a brochure, sit down, talk with them. But I know in my alcoholism, I did have people tell me that I was an alcoholic. Actually, I was in therapy with a therapist, and she's like, "I think you're an alcoholic." And I just stopped seeing her because that fixed the problem. If she's not, there anymore to tell me, fix the problem, right?
My wife's had that exact experience with clients where she's told them, listen, you're not losing weight because you are drinking a bottle of wine every night. I think you need more than weight loss. I think you may have an alcohol problem. And they just ghost. That's it.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah.
So I did write her a letter when I got sober. I'm like, you were right. Sorry. But until someone's really ready to hear it, but there's also the case where people are ready to hear it and they are waiting for that person to come in and be like, hey, there's a solution. So I'm in a unique position being in recovery myself, where my main strategy is I just share my story. I
Mm,
just open up about what I went through, how I overcame my alcoholism, and what I do now, and the changes of how much I was suffering and how great my life is now. So for someone though that's not in recovery themselves, I would say if you know anybody in recovery that can then go talk to that person, it will carry a lot more weight. But in general, I would still try to approach them, or even just let them know, educate them. There is help, there are resources. There's so many nonprofits doing so many amazing things for first responders. And it doesn't have to be full-blown rehab. There are trauma retreats, there are weekend retreats, there's couples retreats, there's therapy, there's all kinds of different things. So it's not a one size shoe fits all. There's a lot of different options. And then I do see the guilt and the remorse that weighs on people, because so many of the guys that have come in here, they've had someone in their agency or department commit suicide. Sometimes it's even been their own partner. And that really weighs on them. So, as an advocate against suicide, I'm like, say something, try something, open up the conversation, even if it's awkward or uncomfortable. And if you have anybody in your circle that's maybe a little more experienced or versed or has some experience as part of their own story, pull them in.
mm. Fantastic. Jeff, any thoughts?
Oh, she's 100% right. I mean, I think, and they teach in AA, if you get a sponsor, how you help somebody is by telling your story and make suggestions. You never tell them what to do, right? We're strong-willed people. We don't want to be told what to do. We want to hear how it works, right? I mean, I want to know what you did that worked. And especially with dealing with a spouse. So if you have a nagging spouse about your addiction, it'll fall on deaf ears. It did with me anyway.
Mhm.
It really has to be your decision in order to start that recovery process, and humility, right? You got to learn humility. And I think most men in America don't know what humility is. You really got to learn humility, and pick up the Bible. You'll learn about humility. you know?
So if guys are listening to this, if guys are saying, "Hey, listen, like I'm feeling a lot of my story and what Shavonne or Jeff are talking about. I'm feeling a lot of like something's telling me like I need to take some steps. Whether that's a treatment center going in and doing a full detox, or whether that's just having that conversation and opening up about what they're struggling with. Where can people find Throttle and Thrive? How can people get in touch with you? How can people in the law enforcement community in particular share your message and help educate folks? Because it sounds like you're pretty tied in and connected in Southern California, but there's 800,000 cops in this country across all the different agencies. So how do we get that message out? How can we share that message and let people know where to find you?
Sure. So, first and foremost, you can just call me or text me on my cell phone, 805-701-1309. Especially if you want to come to treatment or just want some help or want to get pointed in the right direction, I'm more than happy to take your call and help you out with that. If you're more representing an agency or doing peer support and you want to meet with me, I'm happy to do virtual presentations, or if you want to come out to California, give you a tour, or I can do presentations for your agency. You can call me, again, same phone number, or email me, info, I-N-F-O, like information, info at throttleandthrive.com. There's also our website, throttleandthrive.com, and there's contact little forms on there that those all go to my email. You can fill out, you can read about us. But I'd be more than happy to host anybody for a tour or do a virtual presentation for an agency, or sometimes I even travel and do presentations live or attend different events. So yeah, I am happy to help and just want to be part of the solution. So please reach out.
And I hope you're from a financial standpoint. I know that this is not an easy thing it's a burden. I hope from a financial standpoint you're open to people supporting and helping your mission as well. Is there a way that people can donate or can work with you if they've got the grant process, if it's an agency, whoever it is? If there's people out there who are saying this is a mission I want to support financially, how would they do that?
Sure. Get in touch with me because it'll look different depending on what sort of donation and all that kind of stuff. But yes, I would be more than happy to accept any sort of funds or support or volunteers or anything that anyone would like to do, or, even be listed on other people's website just to be able to spread the word, or I can email out digital brochures or mail out physical brochures. And those could be up in like a break room or on a website or getting added to one of the apps. I know a lot of agencies have like a wellness app, so I'd love to be a resource on there. Again, just reach out to me, my phone, 805-701-1309, or email me. But yeah, reach out and I would love to set that up. And I would be so appreciative of anyone willing to come alongside us, because what we do find is some first responders, their insurance won't cover treatment, usually because they have an HMO plan, or sometimes we do get a lot of guys that are retired and they're on Medicare or Medi-Cal, and we don't take those. And so they're basically left with having to pay cash. And it's very expensive to, have a full staff and run a facility and feed everybody and all the things. So it would be so wonderful to receive donations or funds to be able to help provide scholarships for those individuals that can't afford treatment for whatever reason. And that will be able to enable us and help us to be able to provide more care for more of our heroes.
I love that. That is a great point, and we'll make sure all of this information is in the show notes. We'll continue to put in the show notes and make sure that you're represented in everything that we put out there, because I know personally numerous people who committed suicide in my law enforcement career, guys that I knew, guys that I worked alongside back when I was with ICE, and so it's not an uncommon thing. It's more and more common, especially we didn't get into the border, we didn't talk about that, but Jeff and I both had our experience 10 years ago on the border. Obviously, it's only gotten 5-6 times worse since we were dealing with it, and we were seeing Border Patrol agents and CBP officers committing suicide a lot. Then it is nothing compared to what it is now. It is truly an overwhelming problem, and it's something that's going to continue, especially as you mentioned, since 2020, with the way that law enforcement is treated in this country. The fact that we have so many veterans who have come out of the global war on terror and gone into law enforcement, they've dealt with trauma at home and abroad. This is something that needs to be dealt with. It needs to be tackled head on. I'm so grateful for you for answering that call, for listening to, and Jeff and I have talked about this, how many times have doors been closed in both of our faces that we're driving ahead in our careers and saying, this is where I need to go. And it's like God taps you on the shoulder and is like, hey, that ain't it, Chief. And we just don't listen. So when you finally do listen, to bring it full circle, those doors open up, those connections get made, people come into your lives who want to help and support your mission. So I hope that's the case. I would highly, highly encourage you, and I'll deal with this offline. I'll get you in touch with some other people. I highly encourage you to keep reaching out to people who are in our community and spreading that message. Get on as many podcasts as you can, because this is something that's going to save lives. People need to hear this. People need to know that the resources are out there for all the reasons that I didn't even think of. I didn't consider the fact that, people go to jail. Like Jeff and I were internal affairs. We arrested cops, and you send those people off to a general pop prison. There's real problems there, right? We arrested, sheriffs and sheriff's deputies and federal agents. I never thought of it from the terms of what is it like going into a rehab setting where you might be an individual who's arrested people who are, maybe the people who are sitting across. Yeah, who are court ordered there, right? Maybe you're the guy who put them in cuffs in the first place, and they're carrying a whole lot of issues inside about you put me here, not necessarily you, but you what you represent. So all of those things are very eye-opening. I appreciate both of you for being so forthright and open about your stories. I know that's going to help people, and I hope the audience really enjoys this. And Shavonne, obviously, come back anytime. Open door. Anytime Jeff and I are going to get on here to talk about law enforcement issues, we want people who are going to come in here and share things that are going to serve the law enforcement community. That's why we're doing this. You have an open door. Come back anytime that you want to talk about one of your programs or what you've got going on. Please come back and see us again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the show. If you liked today's episode, take a screenshot and tag us on Instagram at @team_Healey with your best takeaway. And finally, make sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave it a 5-star review. It'll only take a few seconds, but those seconds are priceless in helping promote the message and gain access to more inspirational guests that we can share with you. Until next time, out of roll.